Jim used to be the manager of our city's farmers market, and at the end of markets this time of year, farmers would be handing him bags of tomatoes that didn't sell and tell him to just give them to your animals. Whether you grow them yourself, buy them from a farm, or are forcefully being given bagfuls from coworkers or neighbors, tomatoes are everywhere, and we are right there with you. So we'll show you what we're doing with all of our tomatoes and the simple late summer meals that our family is loving. All right, let's go get so many tomatoes.
Yay!
Right now, we're harvesting vegetables from our kitchen garden about every other day. So the essential ones that we check on and harvest every time we're out there are our tomatoes, ground cherries, and broccolini.
Looks red, rosy.
Everything else in our garden, the greens, lettuce, herbs, and all of our storage crops, we just harvest as we need them for eating. So today we're grabbing the tomatoes, ground cherries, broccolini, and then I'm gonna harvest some dill for our dinner tonight. It's currently in the 90s here this week, and so we like to wait to harvest the bulk of our storage crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, carrots, beets, cabbage, and onions until later in the season, like late September or October, when it's gotten cooler outside and our basement is going to be better temperatures for storing long term. It still smells so good. Have you ever had a ground cherry before? They are one of our favorite things to grow. You may have also heard of them called Cape gooseberries. I think there's a couple other names out there too, but they have this paper-like covering around the fruit, and when they get ripe, they turn from a green color to a golden color. The wrapping dries out and gets crispy, and then that little fruit will fall to the ground, which is why they're called ground cherries. And they taste like nothing I've ever had before. So the best way I can describe them is kind of a mix between a cherry tomato and maybe a pineapple, but really you just need to taste them to experience what they're like. But they never last too long in our house. Everyone loves them. Things have also been pretty interesting in our chicken coop right now. So we have a mama hen that has been sitting on her eggs for the last 3 weeks, and just yesterday 3 chicks hatched out, and then either during the night or early this morning a 4th one hatched out. So it's been really fun around here. The kids are loving running back and forth to check on them every couple hours and report back. And there are still a dozen or so eggs that she was sitting on that we are keeping a close eye on to see if we're gonna get any more chicks here. At the same time this mama hen started hatching out these chicks, we actually had a friend come by and drop off 8 laying hens that needed a new home. So she had 8 hens that were only 6 months old, so just recently started laying, but they needed to be rehomed, and so we are welcoming them here. So to get them used to our coop and our homestead, we're gonna keep them in a large dog crate just in the coop, because we want them to know that this is their home, this is where they're gonna come back to. So we'll keep them in a dog crate with food and water for a day or 2 before letting them out into free range with the rest of the chickens. For lunch today, I'm making this really easy pizza dough that's perfect when you need a meal fast. So we still love our homemade sourdough deep dish pizza, and that's what we'll make every weekend for family pizza night. But lately, this simple pizza dough recipe has been a weekly staple for us. So it only has 4 ingredients, and it comes together in just a few minutes. So the ingredients in this are a bit unique, but stick with me. It works really, really well to make a great basic crust. So first you're gonna mix together your dry ingredients, which are flour, baking powder, and salt. And we love to use freshly ground flour so it's at its peak nutrition. This is the hard white wheat flour that we buy in bulk from Azure Standard, and then we mill it on our Nutritional Harvest grain mill. We just bought this grain mill about 1 year ago, and it's been such a helpful investment for us. After you mix your dry ingredients, I add 1.5 cups of yogurt and mix all that together to form a dough. And I know that may sound strange to add yogurt to your pizza dough, but I promise it works. With having a milk cow, I'm always looking for ways to incorporate more dairy into our meals. Plus, the addition of yogurt is gonna add good protein, healthy fats, and some other vitamins and minerals to the crust. I'll post the full recipe below, but those 4 ingredients are all you need: the flour, salt, baking powder, and yogurt to make a really good basic pizza crust. You kind of have to play around with your ratios of flour to yogurt to get that right texture to be able to roll out. So ours was seeming a little too wet, so I added just a few more tablespoons of flour so that I'm able to roll out that dough. Once it's a texture that you can hold, that you can handle, I like to just coat it with a little bit of flour to make it easy to roll out, and then I roll it out in 2 preheated 12-inch cast iron pans. When a cast iron pan is well seasoned and hot with just a little bit of oil in them, it keeps the crust from sticking to the pan at all. Pizza is perfect too this time of year because it's a good way to use up any leftover meat or veggies that you may have on hand, and with all of the fresh garden veggies available, they're perfect for topping your pizza with. I'm gonna make one of our pizzas with a layer of pesto as the sauce, and then a combination of our mozzarella and farmhouse cheddar cheeses that I shred, and then top it with some chicken. We'll sprinkle some basil on there. And then the other pizza is gonna be a tomato sauce base with the mozzarella cheese and the shredded cheddar, and then I'm gonna top that one with sausage and some green pepper. When people talk about from scratch or homemade cooking, it sounds like it needs to be complicated with a ton of ingredients, and it certainly can be, but the recipes that I find myself making over and over again are the recipes that are really basic and simple with ingredients that we always have on hand. And this pizza crust is one of those. I often think, why do people buy frozen pizzas when literally they could whip this pizza up in the same amount of time with so much healthier ingredients? Lately, when so many of our days are filled with harvesting and preserving things from the garden, especially in our afternoons and with the heat that we've been having, I've found myself gravitating toward making really simple meals that often just have a few fresh ingredients paired with some sort of meat. Once the weather gets cooler, we'll start doing more stews and casseroles, but for now we're really enjoying things like salads or a simple meat like steak or chicken with a veggie side. Honestly, just having some fresh garden tomatoes alongside burgers or tacos is such a treat, since this is the one time of year that we're able to enjoy them fresh. But besides eating them fresh, there are still plenty of extra ones to use for preserving to use for the rest of the year. For 3 months before we moved onto our homestead property, we lived with another family nearby as Jim was working so hard to renovate this place to make it ready for us to move into. And one day I was at their home and I walked into the kitchen and I smelled the most delicious smell. I asked her what she was making and she told me that she was roasting tomatoes. Now, up until this point, I had always slow cooked our tomatoes to make tomato sauce, but after I smelled her roasting those tomatoes, I wanted to try roasting them and turning that into sauce, and that's been a game changer for us, and now is how we preserve all of our tomatoes. And I love making them this way because it's so much easier. So what you're gonna do is just add your tomatoes to a 9x13 pan or some sort of rimmed cookie sheet. And you can use any tomato for this. So as you can see here, we have a ton of these giant heirloom tomatoes this year, but I've made sauce with just cherry tomatoes and really anything in between. So if the tomatoes are large, I cut them into smaller chunks. And for smaller tomatoes like cherries, I'll just keep them whole and put them on the pan. Then I'm gonna roast the tomatoes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for a solid 45 minutes to an hour. Now, if you're using just smaller tomatoes like cherry tomatoes, you may only need 20 or 30 minutes for this. You don't want them to, burn, but with larger tomatoes, more time might be necessary. After they're done roasting and they have a nice kind of browned layer on top and they smell aromatic and delicious is when I pull them out. And then all you're gonna do is take those roasted tomatoes and put them in the blender. You can add other seasonings like salt, garlic, or basil. And the beauty of this sauce is that it's not just delicious, but you don't have to worry about peeling or seeding the tomatoes. We like to use our Vitamix for this because it does a great job of completely blending up those seeds and peels into a really smooth and creamy sauce. So I'd recommend, if you're gonna make this, to use some sort of high-powered blender like a Vitamix or something similar, or a food processor for getting the job done. If you use something like an immersion blender, you're still gonna get some of that grittiness from the peels in your sauce. And as you can see here, these giant heirloom tomatoes really aren't ideal for making a sauce because they do produce so much liquid. Something like a Roma tomato is much more ideal. And so just because I have so much liquid here, I'm just gonna leave some of it behind to make a thicker sauce. This method is also how we make our tomato soup, which is one of our other weekly staples this time of year that we love. We pair our tomato soup with some sourdough grilled cheese sandwiches, and everyone in our family rejoices. It's like our favorite thing in August and September. So to make the soup, we do the same thing as we do with the tomato sauce. We roast the tomatoes, and while the tomatoes are roasting, I like to saute some garlic and some onion, and then when the tomatoes are done, I'll blend them together with the sauteed garlic and onion until it's creamy and a nice creamy sauce. And then from there, to turn the sauce into a soup, I add some milk or some cream, some fresh herbs, and voila, you have a homemade tomato soup that's way better than anything you could buy in a can. They hang their towels on the wall in fine pajamas, big and small. The moon is high, the sea is deep. They rock and rock and rock to sleep. All done. I get a lot of questions about the potential harm of eating tomato skins, and so I wanted to address that. So one important thing to know is that the majority of the vitamins, minerals, fiber, and antioxidant activity of the tomato are found in the peel. So by peeling them, you're gonna lose so much of that goodness and nutrients that's in a tomato. And this is actually true for most produce. So the majority of the potassium in bananas is in the peel, or the vitamin C in oranges, most of it is in the peel. And so we actually go out of our way to do things like make banana tea out of the peels, or use dried orange peels and turn it into a powder to add into cooking or smoothies. Use what we can to get the most nutrients from what we're eating. But this is where it's also really important to know where your food is coming from. So I'd only want to use the peels if you knew that your food was grown organically and ideally completely unsprayed. Now there can be potential harms from eating the skins and seeds of tomatoes, and that's from lectins that are found in the tomato skins, as well as the skins of some other vegetables. And lectins have been found to potentially cause some digestive distress. And so for us, kind of our philosophy on this is that because we've never had any digestive distress from eating tomatoes, whether they're fresh or cooked, I like to keep the skins on for all the added nutritional benefit that they provide. But if you are someone that notices GI symptoms after eating tomatoes, you might want to consider removing the peels and the skins and seeing if that helps. One other little tidbit that I find interesting about tomatoes is that actually tomatoes are known for their lycopene content, and when you cook tomatoes, the amount of lycopene actually increases significantly than when they're raw. And so there can be benefits sometimes to cooking things as opposed to eating them in their raw form. Plus they're often more easily digestible this way. So I'm gonna pour this finished tomato sauce into our canning jars and get these canning in the pressure canner. For us, tomatoes was our entry point into this world of preserving our food and feeding ourselves with local food or the food that we grew through the winter months. So whether you have your own garden or getting tomatoes in bulk from a local farmer or neighbor, it's just such an empowering feeling to be able to preserve that locally grown, nutrient-dense goodness and eating that all winter long versus the food that you would otherwise buy from the store. While the sauce is in the canner, I'm gonna get dinner ready. So for dinner, we're having a baked salmon with a creamy dill sauce, and then I'm gonna make some roasted potatoes that I harvested from the garden a few days ago. We don't have seafood often, but we all love it, and I also really appreciate how easy it is to make. I need to get the potatoes roasting since they take longer to cook. And so my favorite way to roast potatoes is on a cast iron pan. I think it really helps to give the vegetables a more crisp outside and still tender inside. They just have a really nice texture cooked that way. I preheated my cast iron pan with some oil, and I'm gonna roast these in a 450-degree oven for about 30 minutes. This variety of potato is called a Corolla potato, and these are probably our favorite variety of all the potatoes that we grow. They're a yellow potato that has a really creamy, buttery texture, and they're just so delicious. While the potatoes are cooking, I'm gonna get the salmon ready. So I thawed these fillets overnight, and I'm gonna bake them at 400 degrees for about 12 to 15 minutes, depending on how thick your salmon is. What? Dill, can you smell it? So good. And after I put those in the oven, I'm gonna make this creamy dill sauce. So this is a pretty similar sauce to a ranch dressing, but we really like it on both the salmon and to dip potatoes in. I'm not gonna measure anything here, but it's basically a 50-50 mixture of yogurt and mayo, so a few tablespoons of each, and then I add some fresh minced dill, as well as a little bit of garlic powder and salt. Good. Our tomato sauce just finished in the canner, so I'm gonna pull that off the stove right around the same time that our potatoes and our salmon are done in the oven. So we're gonna sit down to eat dinner, but we were just thinking about how cool it is that we're able to both simultaneously go out and gather and harvest foods that both feed us for a delicious meal that we're having right here today, but also that we can preserve it to have future meals all winter long. it's easy for harvest and preservation season to get overwhelming. But I really try to, instead of seeing the huge laundry list of everything that needs to get done, just taking on one small project every day or most days of the week, and that way it seems so much more doable and really adds up to a lot by the end of the season.